She crawled from the snow and said she'd fight. The lamp stayed on, the latch string loose. A brass tag, Pike 23, brought Winter's Law down. One shot, one whistle, a county waking. Now she rides for Buffalo to sign her name and hang a king. If you believe thresholds matter, don't blink. Dawn came up pale and mean over the Powder River, a skim of light on a world hard as iron. Amos Whitaker had a mitten off and a knife between his teeth, knocking frozen feed out of a trough with the butt of a hammer. His hands were split from cold and smelled of mutton tallow and saddle soap. Breath lifted from the cattle like old ghosts. The dog, Thimble, raised his gray muzzle and gave one soft sound that wasn't bark or growl. Amos followed the dog's eyes to the birch scrub along the fence line. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. Something moved there, low, cautious, the way a hurt thing tests the world. She came out on elbows and knees, more crawl than walk. Bare feet blue with cold, a burlap scrap around her hips, a torn saddle skirt crossed over her chest and held there with white knuckles. Strips of sunburn had peeled and healed and peeled again, leaving the look of old paper on her shoulders. Her hair was full of twig and frost. She was young, too young for the weight she carried in her eyes. Amos set his hammer down. He didn't speak. He didn't step toward her. He hung his wool coat on a fence post where she could see it plain, then walked to the porch and poured coffee from the pot that sat on the stove ring. He carried the pot and a tin cup back, slow, both hands in sight, and sat them on the top rail with the cup turned upside down. After that, he backed 3 steps, palms open to the air. Thimble trotted out and sat in the snow between them, tail tucked under, head cocked, drawing a line no one had asked for. Her breath came fast. She flinched at the coat like it might be a trap. When Amos shifted his weight, just a shift, she snapped her head up and found his eyes. "I swear," she rasped, the words rough as a file. "I'll fight back if I must." "All right," he said. His voice was the low part of wind under a door. "You won't have to." They held there while the prairie decided what came next. A board in the corral popped in the cold. Somewhere a raven rolled a call and let it fall. Amos eased down to sit on the bottom step of the porch, not too close, not far. He took off his hat, set it beside him, and let the weather work on them both. After a time, she got to her knees. The coat was still hanging where he'd left it. She inched to it like a fox to bait, one hand always free, ready to scratch or run. She pulled the coat off the post without turning her back and wrapped it around herself with little careful motions, the way a person learns to move when everything hurts. The steam off the coffee drifted in a thin line. She looked at it long. Amos kept his eyes on the line where the pasture lifted toward the cottonwoods. He could feel her watching the side of his face, testing for the sudden thing men sometimes do. She took the cup and poured, hands shaking enough to rattle metal. The first swallow made her close her eyes. When she opened them again, they were still wild, but there was a glint that wasn't only terror, something like stubborn life. "What's your name?" Amos asked, not pushing it, just setting the question in the snow between them. Silence, the length of a cloud passing. Then, "June," barely more than air. He nodded once. "Amos." She kept the coat tight and the saddle skirt tighter. Thimble edged a little nearer, gave her a slow blink. She didn't reach to touch him, but her shoulders loosened a notch. "Porch roof cuts the wind," he said after a while. "You can keep your back to a wall there. Lamp stays on if you want it." Her jaw worked. She looked past him to the porch. Dry boards, broom in the corner, a stack of split pignon, a place with edges she could see. She rose in a slow, stiff way and took 3 small steps, then stopped to make sure he didn't move. He didn't. She stepped again. Under the eaves, the air felt different, not warm but less cruel. She curled in on herself with the coat and the cup and watched the open yard like it might lunge. Amos set a folded blanket, old blue army wool, down near her and slid it across with his boot. He kept his hands where she could count them. Snow hissed against the porch posts. The cattle settled. The day lifted another inch, thin as a blade. "Lamp'll be on," he said, standing. "I'll leave the door unlatched, but I won't cross it." June's eyes tracked him the way a skittish mare tracks a rider. She gave one small nod that could have meant anything. Her teeth chattered once and stopped. She tucked her feet deeper into the wool and held the cup under her chin to catch the steam. Amos went inside, set the lamp high, and came back out with another cup for himself. He took the top step again, hat in his lap, and watched the fence line the way men do when they know the land holds more stories than it ever admits. He didn't ask where she'd come from. The wind carried enough answers for one morning, and the rest would arrive when they wanted, or not at all. Toward dark, the wind came round from the north and scraped along the boards like a broom made of knives. Amos trimmed the lamp wick so it wouldn't smoke, topped the font with kerosene, and set it on the porch shelf where the glass could throw a soft circle over the planks. He left the door unlatched and the latch string hanging, same as he'd said. He put a pan of beans on the back of the stove to keep warm, then spooned some into a little tin bowl he'd hammered straight years ago. He set that bowl on the step with a wedge of cornbread and a spoon laid crosswise. Beside it, he placed a second tin cup he'd scoured with sand, hers now, not his. After that, he sat inside the doorway with his cup facing out, his boots on the mat, and his hat on his knee, thimble stretched long across the threshold like an old quilt, ribs rising slow, eyes half on her and half on the dark yard. June watched him from under the eave, chin down in the wool, coat drawn tight. She held the first cup he'd given all day like it was a hot stone. When Amos turned his head to pour himself more coffee, she ate. A quick tilt of the bowl, a scrape of spoon he pretended not to hear. If he looked back too soon, she froze mid-motion, as if his glance could take the meal right out of her. "Lamp stays," he said after a while, voice low. "All night, if you want it." She swallowed, not from the beans, but from some hard thing in her throat. "Don't let it go out." "It won't," he said. "Out here winter has its own law. It isn't written in any book. A man says a thing, and then he does it, or the cold will do it for him. The wind keeps the minutes, the frost keeps the accounts. The house ticked and settled. The stovepipe pinged as it cooled and heated again. Far off, a coyote put a question into the dark, and got no answer, but more dark. Amos took his pocket watch out and set it on the floor beside him, where she could see the face. The second hand walked with the steadiness of a trail mule. The first time the door rattled in a gust, June jerked to a crouch and hid her face in the coat sleeve, breathing fast through her nose. Thimble only rolled an eye and sighed. Amos didn't move. He let the door rattle again and again until the sound wore thin. "It's just boards," he said. "They talk when they're cold." She let the crouch unspool by inches. After a time, she pushed the empty bowl out with 2 fingers, as if the dish might bite. Amos reached, slow as snow melt, took it and set down a little more without comment. She didn't touch it until he had both hands back on his cup and was looking past her into nothing. At some point she made a small noise that might have been thanks and might have been pain. The lamplight caught the line of her cheek and the singed ends of her hair. The saddle skirt under the coat shifted when she moved. He looked away, not from shame he had earned, but from a respect he was trying to keep alive in a hard season. "June," he said, testing the name like a horseshoe on an anvil. Her eyes flicked to him, then to the watch. "Don't ask me anything," she said. "I won't." He meant it in the ordinary way. He would hold his tongue. But there was another promise coiled inside, one he hadn't put words to yet. He wouldn't set his need to know above her need to breathe. The wind pressed on the lamp chimney, and the flame leaned but held. She watched it like a sailor watches a far light he isn't sure is shore. When her head began to dip and twitch with sleep, she fought it, scared of what closed eyes might bring. Amos got up, shuffled once to the hearth, and brought back his wife's old quilt, blue, worn through at two corners, mended by a careful hand long gone. He didn't drape it over June. He set it near her knee and nudged it within reach with the toe of his boot. She didn't touch it for a long count. Then, when the wind sagged for a breath, she slid it closer, folded it over her feet, and tucked the edge under her heels as if pinning herself to the earth. "Porch roof cuts the worst of it," Amos said. "Floor's dry. If the door swings, it's just the latch string in the seam." She gave one small nod and looked at the string, then at him. "Leave it loose," she said. "It'll stay that way." Midnight scrimmed by. The watch ticked steady. Once the cattle shifted and the herd made that low, thinking sound they make when they count themselves in the dark. Amos stood to step inside for more coffee. June's head came up quick and sharp, breath catching. He paused with one boot lifted and set it back where it had been. "Coffee can wait," he said, and sat again. By and by her blink grew slow, the coat loosened a notch, not much. Thimble scooted a hand's width closer until his back brushed her blanket. She didn't send him away. That was something. When the lamp began to spider webs of soot at the top of the glass, Amos eased up, turned the flame down just enough to keep the globe clear, then stepped back. The light thinned, softer, deeper, the kind of light a person can admit sleep into without feeling cornered. Near dawn, he heard the small click of a spoon set gentle on metal. He looked and found the bowl, where it had been, rinsed with a swallow of water from the cup, clean as a person could make it in the dark. The pocket watch showed an hour no one likes. "Rest," he said, not to be obeyed, just spoken into the space between them. June didn't answer. Her breathing evened in a way that wasn't peace but wasn't panic. That thin middle place folks use to cross a night? The lamp burned on, keeping its part of the bargain. And Amos sat the rest of it, boots cooling, back stiff, keeping his part too, while winter wrote its silent signatures on the windows with a dull knife of frost. The day didn't warm. It only brightened the way steel shines before it bites. Amos split kindling in the lee of the barn and let June be. A body needs room to breathe wrong before it can breathe right. She drifted that way by herself, to the long, low building with the thin window and the smell you can't mistake. Rawhide, old sweat, mouse, and oil. The tack room door stuck at the bottom where ice had lifted the sill. She shouldered it and went in sideways, coat pulled close, eyes working quick, hungry, and wary at the same time. Leather hung in rows like sleeping snakes. Cinches, quirts, latigos, breast collars, a blind or two for green teams. Sun had browned the edges and left the centers darker, as if the days had burned around them and never touched the middle of what they were for. Iron rang soft where a wind swing tapped a hook. She set a hand on the bench to balance. Her fingers came back with wax and grit. She looked down at the work scar that cut across her left palm, and then up again. And there it was, a braided lead, whipcord tight, with a brass tag where two strands crossed. The stamp had taken hard and deep. Pike 23. Along the tag's lower lip, a shallow bite showed where a left-handed knife had nicked it. The kind of notch that comes from the same hand doing the same hurry over and over. Her breath quit on her like a spooked horse stopping blind. The coat slipped open an inch, and she didn't feel it. Somewhere in that small room, a fly woke in the warmth off the wall and stumbled into air like a drunk. She reached out. She didn't touch the tag, she held her hand near it, the way people hold their fingers over a flame to judge if it will hurt them again. Her mouth had gone dry. Buckle it. pull, don't look back. The words weren't in the room. They lived in the bones and rattled there. Amos filled the doorway without meaning to, hat in his hand, the cold on his shoulder. He had come for a rasp and a set of hobbles. He stopped with one boot still outside. June didn't turn. "You know this piece," she said. The voice was low and flat. "I do," he said. "Your hand, put it there?" Her finger hovered over the notch, never touching. He watched the brass. He watched her hand, not touching. "Sometimes," he said. "Sometimes it was mine." She looked then, quick and hard, like a hawk. "On people?" He worked his jaw once, old habit. "On whatever Ezra Pike paid to move," he said. "Crates, cages, wagons with curtains. I rode shotgun. I watched the road. I didn't ask what lay under canvas." He swallowed and found the rasp with his eyes, then left it where it was. "That was my sin. I let not knowing be my shelter." June's mouth made a small line that had nothing soft in it. She showed him the palm of her left hand, the scar, then let it fall. "The notch is left made," she said. "Your shop." "Not mine," he said. "Pike's men cut leather in the south shed. Lot of lefties there. Quicker to nick that way." He could hear the coward in his own answer and hated it, small and plain. She laughed once, a quiet break in the throat that wasn't humor. "I smelled this room in my sleep," she said. "Didn't know where it was." "Now I do." Amos took one step in and stopped. "I'll burn that lead if you say so," he said. "Fire doesn't change the shape that made it," she said. "Leave it. Let it hang and say what it is." They stood in the oil smell a while, not equals, not enemies, two people with a tag between them that belonged to neither and both. Wind slid under the door and laid a line of cold across the floorboards. Amos reached for the lamp on the wall and turned the wick up a notch against the draft. The light lifted the brass to a dull glow, like an old coin with blood rubbed off it long ago. "I can't sleep under a lid," she said finally. "Not tonight." "Maybe not any night." "The loft is open to the ridge," Amos said. "You can see all four corners. Door stays ajar if you want it." "I do." He took down a clean blanket and a short hay fork to pull the straw into a bed and set them near the ladder without crowding her. Thimble nosed in and made a circle, then lay with his back to the wall where the stairs began, a gray stone shaped like a dog. June watched him, and some strict line in her face eased half an inch. "You'll be able to hear the yard from up there," Amos said. "Snow talks when it's stepped on." "It'll warn you." "Good," she said. She went up slow, counting the rungs, each foot placed like it was signing something. At the top, she turned and wedged the loft door with a chip of wood so the gap stayed. Through that slit, the day lay white and cold and honest. She lowered the blanket, fluffed straw with the fork, kept the coat on. The knife she had claimed from his kitchen sat small and bright beside her thigh, edge wrapped in cloth. Amos stood below with his hands empty. He looked once at the brass tag and once at the gap in the door, and made himself a promise that had no words in it. Out here, Winter keeps score. A man says he won't cross a line, and then Winter watches to see if he means it. "Lamp'll burn," he said, not sure she could hear. "Latch string stays loose." From the loft, "Leave it." He left it. He blew out the tackroom lamp and stepped into the square, clean cold, feeling the cut of it good and proper. Behind him, leather settled, and that tag swung once and clicked the wood with a small sound that punched above its size. On the ladder, the dog sighed. In the loft, a woman lay with her face to the open, door unclosed, eyes from longer than she needed, keeping count with Winter, same as any soul that had been bound and was learning, inch by inch, what it meant to be her own again. By afternoon, the light turned tin gray and fine snow began to drift. not falling so much as moving sideways, fussed along by a wind that knew the place. Amos checked the mountain stock a last time and was coming back across the yard when he saw a figure in a quilted coat stumping up the track with a sack over one shoulder and a bonnet tied firm under the chin. "Martha Doolan," he said to Thimble, which was the same as saying it to himself. "Winter doesn't let a man be an island out here. It joins places with need." Martha didn't slow. She came to the bottom step and thumped down her sack. "Cornmeal, lard, 2 jars I put up before the first hard freeze. You look like a man that'll pretend he doesn't need it." Her eyes cut past him, up toward the loft gap in the barn, as neat as a hawk finding a vole. "And hello there, little one," she said without raising her voice. June was only a pale shape behind the slit door, but a person who has lived under lids learns early how to listen. Martha loosened her scarf, and with those old fingers that could gut a trout or piece a quilt in the same minute, untied a second wool scarf from the sack. Dark river blue with a row of seed stitches along the edge. "A woman's neck shouldn't pay for a man's winter," she said, and held it up without climbing a step. June watched long, then reached down with the care of someone removing a burr from a mare's eyelid. She did not thank Martha. She put the scarf on crooked and left it that way, like a flag that had found a pole. Inside the barn, Martha set her jaw and took a look at Amos's tack the way old-timers do, meaning to approve nothing and fix what needed fixing. She found a torn saddle skirt and laid it across the bench. "Thread and an awl," she said. Amos brought them. She tapped the leather. "You." June did not come down. "Fine," Martha said, not put out. She showed the stitch in the air with her hands. Push, bite, pull, slow enough to be seen from the loft, fast enough to show she'd lived a life. June's hands answered from above, mirroring the motion. The needle went and came. Leather creaked. Martha nodded once. "Roof work," she said. "Holds against the pull." She looked at Amos without blinking. "When Pike's wind blows, roofs peel." Amos opened his mouth and shut it again. The brass tag in the tack room might as well have been shouting. "I heard," he said. Martha stuffed her mittens back on. At the door she paused, half-turned. "Leave your lamp high," she said to the gap. "And if your heart beats too loud, count the stitches. They're truer than men." Then she went, boots chewing the snow, a small ship sailing into a low sky. Late light brought a man to the cottonwoods at the far fence. No noise but the small clink of a ring on a carabiner. Amos lifted a hand. The man lifted one in return, palm forward like a treaty. Elijah Two Moons stood with the patience of someone who lets the land speak first. He didn't come through the gate. He pointed with his chin to the north, where the hides of the hills wore a darker shade. "Blizzard," he said, and let the word stand edge tomorrow night. Amos waited. Elijah crouched at the fence and tapped the top rail 3 times, each tap a hoofprint drawn in the mind. "Fresh 3 horses," he said. Then he dragged a finger across the rail, light and straight. "And a sled. Runners narrow, not freight big. Fast kind." The wind let go a thin, cold laugh through the grass stems frozen in the wire. June had come down 2 rungs of the ladder without sound. The new scarf made a dark band at her throat. She didn't speak. Elijah watched the yard the way animals do at a waterhole, eyes moving without the head. "Snow'll eat gunshots," he said. "Sound dies in a breath. Tracks last a day if the wind allows." "Neighbors?" Amos asked. "Close enough," Elijah said. "If they hear the whistle, you keep on your nail." He cut his gaze to the little brass whistle hanging by the porch post. Amos had put it there for coyotes years back and never used it twice in a season. Amos took the whistle down and handed it to Martha, who had ghosted back along the fence for one more word because that is what winter makes neighbors do. 1 long, he said, means come. 3 short means fall back, Martha tucked it into her coat like a baby bird. I'll tell the Shaughnesseys and old Mr. Klein. June spoke, voice a scrape of gravel that had found water. If they come, she said, they won't knock. No, Elijah agreed as if she'd named a star. They won't. The 3 of them stood with the fence between, measuring the look of the blue coming down over the hills. Out here, winter writes its own sheriffing. A man can mean to keep a house, or he can mean to make a killing ground, but the weather will show which him he is in the first hour of the first blow. Amos looked at his door, the latch string, the lamp, the shadow of his hat on the wall, and made a choice, plain to himself. This place holds the line, he said, fort of conscience. Not a killing field. Elijah gave a little tilt of his head. Old country, for amen. Martha nodded like a judge. June's hand found the post at her side and held it the way a person holds truth, when it's smaller than fear and has to be kept alive by fingers. The day folded up early, as winter days do. Amos stacked wood tight under the eave, checked hinges, set water where it could not freeze, and turned the lamp up 1 mark. The brass tag in the tack room swung once, then went still. The house breathed. The dog slept. Somewhere far off, 3 horses and a sled wrote their names in powder where the wind hadn't yet learned them. The weather went tight as wire. By late day the wind laid down and left a cold so clean you could hear leather think. Amos set the lamp higher and rapped frost off his boots on the porch step. Thimble lifted his head, ears forward, then flattened them. A horse snorted out on the road, the kind of sound a rider makes quiet on purpose. 3 knocks, not loud, spaced even, a man taking his own measure. Amos stood, rolled his shoulders once to settle the ache, and opened the door with his hand well clear of anything that could be read as a reach. The lamp threw a coin of light onto the yard. In that circle stood Boone Maddox, long coat, powder white, at the hems, hat brim crusted, scar along the jaw the color of old rope. 2 hands waited back in the half-dark on restless horses, faces shuddered by the cold. "Evenin', Amos," Boone said, like they shared one. "Evenin'," Amos said, not giving it back or taking it away. From the barn loft, June had set the wedge in the door, just so. The gap made a narrow ribbon of yard. She took Boone in by pieces. Frosted whiskers, a glove worn thin at the trigger finger, ice on the scarf. Her hand found the knife hilt in the straw and held it without moving. Boone tipped his chin to the lamp. "Light's friendly, shush." "Light's for seeing," Amos said. Boone shifted his weight and let the silence sit. Somewhere a board popped in the cold like a knuckle. "Mr. Pike wants his missing freight," Boone said. He kept his voice low, neighbor plain. The word freight rolled in his mouth, like it had never meant a person in his life. "This house holds no freight," Amos said. "Only people." A small smile cut Boone's cheek. He stepped far enough into the light to show he wasn't scared of it, and not far enough to give it everything. "You always were a man like the line," he said. "Here's mine. We take her back." No noise. Your fences stand. Your winter comes and goes with no hard memory in it. The dog rose. A ridge stood up along Thimble's spine. Amos dropped 2 fingers, and the ridge lay down, but the eyes did not. "You can tell Ezra Pike," Amos said. "I've got a better trade than fences." He looked past Boone, past the men, past the dark, to a town most folks only said, when they meant to get square in the eyes of law, "Buffalo." Boone's gloved hand went to his jaw, like he meant to rub heat into it, then stalled right on the scar. He left it there a breath and let it fall. The horse behind him blew white and stamped once. "What's in Buffalo?" Boone asked. aiming for idle and missing it by an inch. Folks who read ledgers, Amos said. Men who know a seal when they see one. It wasn't brag. It wasn't threat. It was winter talk, straight, counted. Boone's smile went flat. You don't want this to turn mean, he said softly. I'm a caller today. Next time I'm a taker. Here's what I know, Amos said. A man keeps a promise or winter. Keeps it for him. I told the girl the lamp stays on and the latch string stays loose, and no one walks her across this yard without her say-so. I aimed to match my mouth. From the loft, June could see Boone's eyes under the brim. They weren't cruel in the way some are. They were arithmetic. He was weighing what he knew about Amos from a quarter-century ago against the man who stood on a threshold with a dog at heel and a lamp behind him. Boone stepped back a pace until the light cut off his boots. He looked at the yard, then at the dark road that had brought him. He turned his head just enough to send his voice to the men behind. We'll come back when the snow learns to talk, he said. Amos didn't answer. He let Boone have the last word and gave him the first consequence, stillness. Boone gathered his reins. The two riders moved like they'd rehearsed the leaving. Sled runners whispered on the hardpack beyond the gate. Hooves clicked on ice, then softened to nothing in the drifted ruts. The lamp glass ticked as a hairline of soot crawled and cleared. Amos shut the door slow and set the latch, then left the string hanging just as he'd promised. Thimble lay down again but didn't close his eyes. In the loft, June breathed out for the first time since the knocks. The scarf Martha had given her itched at the throat, the way new wool does, but she didn't pull at it. She kept her knife in her hand until her fingers warmed the handle, and the handle remembered her shape. Out here, winter keeps score with a nail on the inside of your ribs. One mark for words, one for deeds. Amos set another stick on the fire and listened to the night take their names and file them away. He had been measured. Next time would not be a call. It would be a taking unless someone else chose different first. Before sunup, Amos took a pry bar to the loose plank under the stove. The wood gave with a cough of dust. He drew out a small wooden box wrapped in old oilcloth. Inside lay what he'd kept too long, a brass seal stamped EPF, and a torn payroll ledger, pages foxed and thin, names marching in a hard hand alongside mile marks, and the sly notations Pike's men used for hidden stops. He set both on the table and stood with his hands on the edges, like a man steadying a skittish colt. June watched from the doorway, coat tight, scarf dark at her throat. That's what keeps him fed, she said. And what can starve him, Amos said. He closed the box, if we use it right. By mid-morning, the sky had a pewter look, the kind that flattens land and time. Amos sent Thimble ahead and walked to the north fence where the cottonwoods hold the drift. He set the wooden box on a post and brushed snow from the lid. He didn't send word. Out here, certain things call men better than paper. They came quiet, Boone Maddox and one rider only, the second hand from last night gone like he'd thought better of the wage. Boone drew up 2 horse lengths off and studied the box like it might bite. Trade day, he said. Talk day, Amos answered. He lifted the lid and turned it so the contents faced Boone. No flourish, just light and brass and the old rot smell of paper. Boone let the reins slide and leaned from the saddle. His eyes tracked the seal, then the ledger, then Amos's face. He didn't reach for either. Men who reach first tell more than they mean to. You been sitting on this, he said. Since the day I figured my silence wasn't neutral, Amos said. He tapped a finger once on the ledger, not the names. This book puts Pike where the law can see him. This seal says the book's not a story. A long breath left Boone. His gloved hand drifted toward his jaw, touched the scar, and slid away. What do you want for him? He asked. Two things, Amos said. The girl walks free, and this land goes quiet. No riders, no fires, no night looks through my windows. Boone's smile barely lifted. You asking a river to run backwards. I'm telling you which bank will hold, Amos said. He lifted his eyes to the line of hills. I also know where you planted what shouldn't be planted. Crazy Woman Creek, 2 miles above the cottonwoods. A cairn of 3 stones where the bank breaks like a bad tooth. And a second under the deadfall that points at sunrise. That's yours. I carry the knowing. You decide whether I carry it to Buffalo. The name fell between them and cracked like ice. Boone didn't look rattled, not in the big ways, but he pinched the bridge of his nose once, quick, a man feeling the weight of numbers he didn't like. Judge, there's got ears for yarns, he said. Judge Abernathy has a clerk who reads columns, Amos said, and a deputy Yates who can follow tracks when snow grants him the day. Boone swung his boot down and stood on the snow like it might take him if he stayed too long. He reached into the box at last and lifted the seal with care, weighing it in his palm. He didn't touch the ledger. Suppose I take this and burn it, he said. You can burn the brass, Amos said. Won't burn what it proves. Men remember impressions better than words, and I have the ledger twice, once in paper, once in a head. That hasn't failed me yet. He tapped his temple, not proud, not bluff. Wind ran a cold finger across the fence. The horses shifted and set a hoof. Boone looked down at the seal, one heart beat longer than a liar would. Then he tucked it inside his coat like a priest pockets a relic. His eyes were a shade dimmer when they came back up. I'll pass it along, he said. No promises. One will do, Amos said. A good one. Silence lay thin. In it, 2 geese went over, lost in low cloud, talking to each other like old hay under a blanket. Boone stepped back to his horse. You always did fancy words like nails, he said. You set 'em and hang heavy on 'em. Out here, winter does the hanging, Amos said. I just set what I can straight. Boone put a boot to the stirrup and paused, half-mounted. If I come back in weather, he said, I won't knock. I know, Amos said. Boone looked once toward the barn. He didn't see June in the shadow of the hay door, the scarf line neat against her throat, the knife small and bright in her hand, the way a truth is bright when you finally say it. He swung up, touched his hat like the motion lived in the bones, and turned the horse. The second rider followed, faces already going to ice. When the sound of them was gone, Amos closed the box on the ledger and slid it under his coat. He walked home slow, the kind of slow that lets a man count what's left to do. Martha met him at the porch with the brass whistle between finger and thumb. Signal? She asked. He nodded. 1 long, come, 3 short, fall back. He lifted it to his mouth and sent the 1 long out across the flats. It flung itself off the cottonwoods and came back thin but true. He waited, then blew 3 quick, short, sharp. The sound died clean in the air. Elijah's reply came faint from the north, a mirror of the pattern, then another from the Shaughnessy place. Old Mr. Klein's barn bell added a clumsy agreement, 1 low clang that meant he'd heard enough. June stood in the doorway, watching the patterns make their way through the cold. He took the seal, she said. He did. And left the book, for now. Amos laid the box on the table and set a hand on it. Winter law says we keep our side. We'll see if men do. Snow began in earnest, small grains driven hard, needling the porch posts. The lamp hummed. Thimble leaned his weight against June's shin and looked up at her as if to say the counting had begun. She let her fingers rest on his head, not petting, just placing, the way you mark which life is yours to keep. Snow stacked clean overnight, soft as sifted flour on every rail and stump. The world had the hush it gets after a hard fall, when even crows think twice before talking. Amos kicked a trench from house to barn and felt the cold ride his shins, he swung the door, and the smell met him. Hay, horse, old leather, a hint of mouse, a life. June was up already, scarf dark at her throat, coat belted tight. She had a needle pinched between 2 fingers and a strip of saddle skirt across her knee. Martha had chalked a line for her last evening and left a thimble and an awl. Now June worked that line, push, bite, pull. The stitch took and held with a small creak that sounded like a thing forgiven. "Roof stitch," Martha said from the bench, approving nothing out loud, approving all the same. She had walked over at gray light with bread and a towel and stayed to check the work. "Holds against tug." June squinted, bit the thread, licked the end, and sent it back through. Her hands were steady in the way of someone who has done careful things in the dark. She didn't chatter. She didn't glance up to see who liked it. She let the leather tell her when it was right. A foolish rooster tried the rail outside and misjudged the ice. He went skittering like a dropped pan, wings flogging, pride sliding behind him. June made a sound then, small, startled, bright, a laugh with the burr still on it. She smothered it with her sleeve like it was a sin. Martha didn't look up, only said, dry as tinder, "He'll preach about it Sunday." Amos fed the team their grain and watched without watching. The laugh had gone through him sideways and loosened something that had been cinched too tight. He measured out oats for Thimble's old teeth and set the bucket down. The dog ate slow, one eye on the world. When the seam lay flat and true, June set the skirt aside and rose. She rinsed the needle in a bowl and wiped it on her cuff. Martha handed her a coil of good thread. "For later," she said, "for when a thing that matters starts to come apart." June nodded. She took the thread like a man takes a clean word. They worked until the cold crept under the door again. Martha bundled her bread back into the towel. "1 long whistle," she reminded, patting her coat. 3 short to fall back. I got it. Mr. Klein says he won't run, but he'll ring like a fool." She wagged a mitten in Amos's direction. "Keep your lamp high." Winter Reed's lips. When Martha left, the barn settled. June fetched a broom and worked up the aisle, slow, careful, putting straw where it belonged. She stopped at the tackroom door and glanced at the hanging lid with the P.I.K. 23 tag. She didn't touch it. She didn't need to. Naming a thing once is sometimes enough. She swept on. At noon, Amos set a skillet on the stove and fried side meat with onions until the smell filled the house and pushed back at the cold. He sliced bread off Martha's loaf, thick, and poured black coffee. When June came to the threshold, he didn't gesture her in. He stepped back himself and made the room bigger. They ate facing the same window, not each other. For a time there was only plate scrape and stove tick, and the old watch keeping its stubborn minutes. June's eyes were clearer today, if still rimmed red from frost and not sleeping right. "You haven't," she said at last, not quite looking at him, "asked for anything." Not once. Amos set his fork down and warmed his hands on the coffee cup. "You've had too much taken," he said. "I won't take more." She breathed out through her nose, hard, like a horse told something decent. That was all. It was enough. When dusk came early, as it does in weather, June stepped out to the porch and stood a long while watching the yard fade into the kind of blue a person can fall into. The lamp behind her made a thin gold rim around her shoulders. Then she turned, went quiet to the back room, and set something small by the door to Amos's quarters. A folded shawl, hand-sewn, coarse wool, worked soft by time, a narrow line of pale thread along the edge where she'd taught herself a new stitch. In the corner she had set a letter, J. It was plain as a mark on a calf's hip. It said only what it said. "I am here. I am myself." Amos found it after washing up. He didn't pick it up right away. He looked at it the way a man looks at a creek he isn't sure he should cross, measuring the pull, remembering years. He laid his hand on the shawl, just his palm, and lifted it once, then put it back where she'd set it. Some gifts don't want fuss made over them. They want a place to be. Night walked in without knocking. The wind thinned and began to whisper under the sill. Out here, winter law keeps folks straight. Say it, then do it, or the cold will correct you. Amos turned the lamp down to a steady heart and left the latch string loose. June bedded in the loft with the door cracked enough to see the stars if there were any. Thimble took his post at the foot of the ladder, a gray stone with breath. Sometime deep, when the house had forgotten it used to be a tree, June woke fast and didn't lunge for the knife. She lay still and listened. The watch, the stove, the long, slow breath of a man who was not crowding her. She felt the shawl's weight across her shoulders. She pulled it up under her chin and counted the stitches like Martha had taught. 1, 2, 3, until the numbers ran together and she drifted in the small, safe water between fear and sleep. Before dawn, Amos stepped to the door and looked north. The sky had a bruise on it that hadn't been there at sundown. He tasted iron on the wind and knew what it meant. Then he went back inside, poured coffee, and watched the lamplight make a little island in a dark that was getting ready to move. Behind him, on the chair where he'd laid it, the shawl kept its shape, holding a quiet that hadn't lived in the house for a long time. By noon, the sky had that hammered look, pewter, beaten thin and mean. Snow didn't fall so much as lift, a dry sift twisting low across the yard like it had business of its own. Amos set his shoulder to the big door and ran the bar through the iron straps till the wood spoke back. He checked hinges with a thumb, felt the bite of cold in each screw. The house had been a tree once. It would remember how to stand. Elijah 2 moons came by the cottonwoods and drew a map in the snow with a willow switch. "Wind eddies here," he said, circling a black-rooted stump. "Blind corner by your woodpile. If they come on a sled, runners will swing wide at the pump." He didn't waste words. He set 2 stone tombstones on the porch rail to mark safe angles and left them there like little laws. Martha Doolin tightened her bonnet and hung the brass whistle from a button with twine. "I'll be where the lane meets the creek," she said. "If I blow 1 long, folks'll come with what they have. If I give 3 short, you're to fall back and let older bones make your case." She patted the whistle as if it were a child and stomped off, her boots printing sense into the drift. Amos moved hay from the front of the barn to the back to choke any quick push. He cleared lines of fire that weren't for firing so much as for seeing. He tucked the ledger into a rotted feed trough with a false board laid over. Mouse gnawed, innocent. He walked the yard and said out loud what was true, so his bones would hear it. "This threshold is where we stand. We don't shoot first. We don't give a person to men who so name or freight." Winter's listening. June watched and learned the shape of the place the way a hand learns a tool. In the tack room, she took the small kitchen knife, edge wrapped in cloth so it wouldn't shine, and practiced slipping it under a rein near the bit. 2 pulls and the leather opened quiet as breath. She did it again with her eyes closed. She rigged a kerosene lantern with a scrap of rag threaded through the bale so she could throw it and keep her fingers. She lit it once, watched the flame find its size, then snuffed it and set it by the door like a thought she could use when it mattered. Thimble shadowed her from post to post, the old dog reading her worry and setting his own steady next to it. When she crouched by the pump, he leaned his shoulder into her knee as if to say, a body belongs on the earth, not in the air where fear tries to keep it. Toward evening the wind shifted and came cold off the breaks, straight down the draws. The eaves groaned. Frost feathered the window glass into ferns that opened and closed when the door moved. Amos brought the bar from the barn and set it by the house door, leaned to where his hand would find it without looking. He took the lamp down, trimmed the wick, and turned it to a steady heart, high enough to say welcome, low enough not to blind. Elijah returned at last light and tapped him up the porch with two susut knuckles. "When it starts," he said, "sound will go short. A shot will be a hand clap. Don't count on echo, count on eyes, count on neighbors." Amos nodded. "One long," he said, and blew it. The whistle's deep call rolling thin across the white like a long string. Elijah lifted 2 fingers, heard. Amos answered with 3 shorts, quick and crisp. Elijah's mouth made a line that could have been a smile. "It's enough," he said, and went to ground in the black of the woodpile, where wind left a pocket men forgot to look at. Inside, June wrapped the jay shawl around her neck and stood at the threshold until she could feel where the line lay under her feet. She touched the latch string, then let it hang. "Lamp stays," she said to no one, to everyone. Amos set his hat on the peg and spoke what he meant to live. "No man crosses this sill for her," he said. "If there's crossing done, it's us stepping forward to the law in Buffalo." The house settled itself as if to listen. The barn answered with one wooden pop. Out on the flats the last light bled down to iron. Snow began to travel low and fast, and the world narrowed to what a lamp can hold and a heart can keep. They ate standing, bread, cold meat, coffee black enough to read by if a man knew that language. June tucked the lantern under her arm and took her place at his shoulder. She didn't say she was ready, she was. Out here, winter law doesn't ask for speeches. It asks for hands steady, feet planted, promises kept when the wind comes looking. And the wind was coming, hard, soon, without knocks. Night came in sideways, carried on a wind that moved low and mean. Snow ran the yard like quick water, not falling, just going somewhere in a hurry. The lamp threw a round room on the porch boards. Amos stood in the doorway, one boot on the sill, shoulders square. June took her place at his right, the lantern in her hand, wick cold but ready. The latch string hung, soft as a promise. A sled slid out of the dark, ghost-white runners whispering. Boone Maddox rode the tail like a captain, 2 men flanking on horses with scarves iced to their mouths. No talk, no knock. The wind took even the sound of leather and made it small. Elijah 2 Moons was nothing but a darker piece of dark by the woodpile. Martha Doolin waited where the lane met the creek, mitten wrapped around the brass whistle. Boone lifted 2 fingers. The men began to fan, one toward the pump, one along the barn's shadow, the sled angling wide, just like Elijah had said it would when the wind drove from the north. It felt like a hand closing. "Now," Amos said, quiet. June snapped the lantern alight, the strike scratching like bone on bone. She swung and threw. The lantern sailed low, the rag loop doing its work. It cracked against the pump box and burst into a broad orange that showed every lie the dark had been keeping. Horse flank steaming, a scarf crusted stiff, the glint of a gun barrel an inch too far forward. The men flinched, eyes gone to slits against heat and light. Amos stepped 1 pace out, boots on the top step, and his hand moved as if flicking a fly off a horse's eye. Something brass arced and skittered across the snow, a hard, bright sound that turned heads. Boone's hand went to his coat by reflex, the place he'd pocketed the EPF seal 2 days back, and then down to the glint on the ground. In that split, clean as a knife through thin ice, Elijah came out of the woodpile and cut the sled line, edge catching leather once, twice. The runners slewed, the load jackknifed. One of the horses sat back hard and screamed. "One long," Amos barked. Martha answered from the lane, the whistle giving a deep, carrying call that rolled the fence lines. A lantern winked at the Shaughnessy place, then another. Old Mr. Klein hit his barn bell with something iron and made a clumsy church of it. The sound didn't travel far in that weather, but it traveled far enough. Boone came off the sled like a cat and brought his gun up. Not high, not sloppy. A man who'd handled winter and men before. Amos didn't draw. He set himself on the threshold, the dog at his shin. the lamp behind him laying his shadow long. June's empty hand went to the rein nearest her, one clean pull with the small kitchen knife she'd practiced with, and a horse's head suddenly had no say in a bit. He blew sideways, eyes rolling, and banged a rider's knee against the pump. "Think it through," Amos said, voice flat as the step he stood on. Snow hissed in the flame and made little stars. "Ledgers hid where your men won't find it. Names and stops enough to hang your mister. Pike in Buffalo. That seal in your coat only makes it tidier for the judge." A shot cracked, one more handclap than thunder. It took a splinter off the porch post and died a foot from the lamp. Thimble didn't flinch. June didn't move. Amos didn't step back. He put one finger on the post where the splinter was missing and left it there like he was saving the place for later. Elijah stood with his knife low, eyes calm. The cut sled yawed across the yard like a fish that had bitten the wrong hook. From the lanes came answer lights, 2, then 4, bobbing in the wind. Men and women with rifles, old and oiled, coats buttoned to the chin, faces set in the way winter sets them when a thing has gone on too long and needs stopping. Boone's eyes worked the yard, the door, the faces coming through the white. He had numbers to count, a threshold he couldn't take without making 3 corpses strangers would remember, a ledger he no longer owned, a seal in his pocket that felt hotter than brass ought to feel in this cold. He looked at June, at the hard, small life of her standing where men had told her not to stand, and then at Amos's boots planted exactly on the sill. "Winter law," Amos said, quiet, almost kind. "Say a thing, do a thing, or winter will do it for you." Boone breathed once through his nose, the steam making a plank of white. He holstered. The man by the pump muttered something like a prayer and found his reins again. The bitless horse fought and lost. Elijah stepped back into shadow the way a stone sinks into water and disappears without bubbles. Martha blew one more long just to remind the distance what side it ought to be on. Boone took the sled rope and gave it a jerk to free it from the cut. It wouldn't. He left it. He put 2 gloved fingers to the brim of his hat, not courtesy, just habit, and backed a step. "Tell your judge to keep warm," he said. "Weather's turning." "Buffalo keeps a stove," Amos said. Boone's mouth made a shape that wasn't a smile. He turned, mounted in one smooth throw, and withdrew, the men falling in. The sled bumped once, twice, then slid into the night and went small as any wrong thing does when it can't stand up to a whole county and the season itself. The flame at the pump guttered and died under snow. The yard fell back to breathing. Neighbors came up out of the dark, faces raw, eyes asking and then easing when they saw the threshold had held. Someone clapped Amos once on the shoulder. Someone else pressed June's hand and left without a word. Mr. Klein's bell gave one foolish last clang, as if it had been part of the plan all along. Amos picked up the brass that had skittered. It was nothing but a spent shell, cold, bright, useful for a heartbeat, and then not. He put it in his pocket like a memory you don't throw away yet. June stood with the J-shawl tight and her knife clean. Elijah leaned his back to the woodpile and watched the snow, right over the sled marks so quick you could almost see it happening. "Not over," Martha said, voice low. "No," Amos said, "but it's ours to finish the right way. Out here, winter doesn't settle arguments. It makes folks honest about which ones they aim to carry into spring. Tonight the yard had told the truth, plain. The line held, the door stayed a door, and the people in the lamp's circle chose to be company, not cargo. Morning came white and wordless. The yard was a clean page with one thin red line written across it, where a man had brushed his knuckles and bled into snow. The wind had laid down. Sound carried again, the way it does when winter pauses to hear what folks mean. Amos and Elijah walked the ruts where the sled had yawed, reading the story like print. Martha stood at the lane with the brass whistle tucked back under her coat, cheeks raw, eyes sharp. June stepped from the porch with the jay-shawl snug and her hands bare to the cold, as if it helped to feel the air honest against her skin. They gathered what could not argue. The ledger from the rotted trough, wrapped in a flour sack, the sled groove cast in the frieze like a signature, the spent shell Amos had pocketed, the names June could say without closing her eyes. Amos set each in a neat row on the porch rail, an inventory of the night that almost was. "Road'll set by tomorrow," Elijah said. "Hard crust by noon if the blue holds. 2 days to Buffalo if nothing breaks." Martha hitched her scarf. "Shaughnessy's will watch your stock. Mr. Klein'll sleep on your porch with that foolish bell." She looked to June, not Amos. "You decide when to move." June took a breath that felt like the first honest one she'd had since she remembered her name. "I'll testify," she said. "No drama in it. A straight rail laid across the snow. I'll sign what needs signing. I'll tell a judge who cut the leather and who called me freight." Amos nodded once. "Then that's what we do." They packed small and right. Coffee, salt, a side of bacon, 3 blankets, the ledger wrapped again and tied with baling twine. Amos dug out a pair of women's boots from a crate that had belonged to his wife in a life that looked like a picture now, too distant to touch, too dear to throw away. June worked the laces with the fingers that had stitched through leather the day before. She set the knot and stood, heels finding the shape. The sky went hard blue by noon. The road showed itself, not friendly but knowable. They hitched the team to Amos's light runner sled. The rails sanded smooth the way an old man files a tooth that's been a trouble too long. Neighbors showed without being asked. Martha with a basket, the Shaughnessy boys with a coil of rope, old Mr. Klein with a hat that didn't fit and a face that did. At the lane, Elijah stepped in front of the team and put a hand to each nose. "Step clean," he told them, which is the same as prayer in a place that doesn't waste words. He walked point to the ridge. At the top he stopped, lifted his chin to the north, and turned back. "I'll be at your door or your fire when you return," he said. It was a promise and a map. They slid off the home ground and into the long white. Winter Law rode with them. Say it, then do it. The runners hissed on crust. The cold made teeth sing. June kept her back straight and her eyes forward. Twice she spoke a name into the wind, as if that made it less sharp. Amos didn't ask which names. A man can keep company without taking a thing. They made the first night in a line shack with a door that didn't quite meet the jamb. Amos stacked wood. June set the ledger under her saddle for weight and slept with her boots on. Dawn, the sky was brittle as blue china. They pushed on, the team steady, the wind behind. Buffalo rose out of the flats like a handful of boards had learned to stand together. The courthouse stove held a heat a person could lean a back into and know it would stay. Deputy Marshal Yates met them at the bottom of the steps, hat off, eyes taking measure without malice. Amos put the flour sack on his palm. Yates weighed it like a man who's been handed rocks before and found them gold once or twice. In a back room that smelled of paper and ink, Judge C. Abernathy sat with his coat on and his glasses low. June stood where he could see her and told him the part a court needed. She didn't dress it. She didn't look for pity. She said who buckled, who nicked left, who called her by a number, and who stood on a threshold and refused to use that word. The judge's pen moved like a man hammering fence staples, slow, sure, no flourish. "Affidavit," Yates said, sliding paper and a bottle of ink across a scarred table. The nib scratched. June wrote June Avery with letters that wobbled once and then held true. She set the pen down, wiped one finger on her shawl where it had found a smear, and breathed. Abernathy read the ledger like a preacher reads a list of sins he's heard before. He tapped the seal impression on the first page. Empty brass in Boone's coat, or not. The shape that had made it lived here in ink. That'll do, he said. He looked to Yates. Warrants. Yates nodded. I'll see to it, he said. His eyes went to Amos and stayed there a notch. You carried this weight long. Too long, Amos said. Long enough to bring it here, Yates answered. Outside, the sled stood where they'd left it. A boy ran past with his scarf loose, careless with warmth, the way boys are. June watched him and touched her own scarf where Martha's seed stitches ran straight. She pressed it flat, then let it wrinkle again. Not everything has to be neat when it's true. They took coffee at the diner next to the livery, steam fogging the window where the sun made a square of light on the table. Amos wrapped his hands around the cup. June did the same. They didn't speak much. There wasn't much left to say that talking could improve. When they rode home, the sky held. Night found them at the line shack again, and this time June slept without her boots. The next day the ranch came up over the rise, simple as it had gone. Barn, fence, the black square of the house window, lamp turned down to a coal because Martha believed a promise, because Klein's bell hadn't had to ring, because Elijah read weather like a psalm, and had known the drift would not eat the door. They stood a while on the porch when they got there, neither going in first. The dog came round from the woodpile, stiff in the hips, pleased in the eyes. June knelt to him and didn't think twice before she put her hand on his head. Road's not the last of it, Amos said. No, June said, but it's the right one. Out here, winter doesn't forgive. It offers a way forward. They took it, the two of them and the few who'd stood in their circle when the wind went hunting. The brass tag in the tack room still swung when drafts found it. It told what it told. The shawl hung on the chair back, holding the shape of a woman finding a better shape of herself. On the porch rail, the place where the bullet had chewed wood, waited for a small brass nail and a strip of tin. Amos would mend it when the weather gave him a minute. For now, the lamp burned easy, and coffee rose in the cold like a thing you could live on. They were not saved. They were standing. Sometimes on this side of the river, that's the same gift by another name. The West isn't loud every day. Most times it's a lamp turned down, coffee breathing, a dog leaning into your shin while the wind tests the boards. If this one settled some dust in you, tell me with a simple mark. Drop 0 if you'd hold the doorway, 1 if you'd light the lamp. And if you want more rivers crossed slow and true, more stubborn mercy, more winter law, tap subscribe. I'll keep a chair warm on the porch and a story ready when you come back.